And when they make like custom papers of like different like textures and like little bits, and it's like the pulp is still there, and you're like, oh, mama. Oh, hello. Didn't see you walk in. Whoo! Welcome. You are listening to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast, and today we're going to be talking about some paper.
Paper's cool.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams untrue!
Talk about paper.
Everyone loves paper. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. So today we're going to be talking about paper and all the fun stuff that goes along with it. I am Rennie. I use they, she pronouns. I make the webcomic Kate Blast.
And I am Crispy. I use she, they pronouns, and I work on the webcomic Ghost Junk Sickness.
I'm Verathane, or Allie. My pronouns are she, they, and I work on two webcomics, which are Teralt and Witchwood.
So paper is such a complex subject with so much history. So the people who are new to traditional art or traditional mediums might find themselves faced with all sorts of questions or terms or things that they just don't know when they're shopping for paper for the first time. So for starters, there's different types of paper like Bristol, newsprint, mixed media, and so on. There's just so much bombarding you. So let's go into some of the terminology that folks might see while finding the paper that's right for them. So what are the top things that you look for when you're looking at paper?
I feel for me personally, I always am looking for something with a mindset of what am I planning to do with this. So one of the terms that might come up for people who are looking at paper is acid, as in acid free, or not acid free. If you're planning to do art that's just like for practice, like if you're picking up something and you're going to do like life drawing on it or gesture studies or like quick sketches, you can grab just about anything that happens to come to hand, like newsprint or whatever. But if you plan to make art on paper that you want to keep around for a while, like a finished piece that you might sell or hang on a wall or whatever, you want to make sure you're looking for paper that is acid free, which they also will call archival. That means it'll last a very long time because acid in paper is introduced as part of the paper making process, and it'll gradually degrade the quality of the paper over time. It'll start to go yellow and eventually just disintegrate.
The next thing that you want to consider is the weight of the paper. So you're going to be seeing that a lot when you go into stores as well. They're going to be talking about like you're going to see this number that's either in grams or in pounds, and this means that in a factory they weigh the paper by stacks of 500 to determine the weight, and that basically is testing the durability of the mediums that you're going to be using on the paper. So usually with something that has less weight to it, you're going to be using pencil or pen, and as you're going heavier to something that's, you're going to start with the 60-pound paper. Usually you can use with sketching, and as you go up, you're going to be using more intense mediums like watercolors that demand layers of medium, and test the paper. So you're looking at about 90 to 150 to 200-pound paper, and so on. So it's a big deciding factor depending on the mediums that you're using when you're choosing this paper to see the weight and what makes sense.
So what about texture?
The texture is also definitely an important quality in a paper, because if you plan to work primarily with like wet mediums like inks, those are going to handle very differently on the surface than a dry medium like charcoal or pencil. And different surface textures tend to work better with some mediums than with others. So you can get some paper that's super smooth and feels almost like plastic when you touch it, and then other paper that's like so textured it's like running your hand over like the surface of a road or something like that. And generally, the more textured papers, like Actually, no, I'm not quite right. I was about to say the more textured stuff tends to work best with like dry medium, because when you're using charcoal, it's really nice to be able to see some of that paper texture surface coming through.
Mhm.
But there's also cold press watercolor papers. Um, you can have different textures for all kinds of different mediums. And while you're shopping for things, they tend to be packaged with suggestions as to what kind of medium you're going to use it for. Like watercolor paper, obviously, is good to use with watercolors.
Is it though? No.
Usually. That's why I don't use absolute terms.
So the last thing that you're going to see, and it's something that you're going to be wanting to kind of ask about, is the sizing of the paper and if it's done correctly for the mediums again that you're using for. So sizing just basically means that it's a part of the process that prepares your paper to interact with the medium that you've chosen. So usually paper being the type that you're using for usually dry media with its pens and paper or pencils. That's what they considered sizing. Usually, if you go for something that's more wet, that's when you're going to be using canvas or board, which is usually prepared with gesso. But you can also use paper with those mediums. But sized is definitely a part of a process that makes sure that it's the appropriate material imbued with the paper to make it interact with the medium correctly.
The sizing specifically is something that tends to control the absorbency of the paper. So when they add the size, it means that you can write on it with a pen, and the pen will kind of sit on top of the paper instead of being immediately absorbed into it. So some papers, if they have like no sizing at all, those are suitable for being printed on with like an inkjet printer or something, because that's just going to sit on top of it like a big block. But if you try to write on it, you'll see all the tiny lines crawling away from each pen stroke that you make, um, and that's because it's not really appropriately sized for a wet, like hand drawn or handwritten medium being used on it. That one's it's a slightly more obscure term, and if you ask like a random employee at an art store about it, they might not necessarily know how to answer your questions.
They might just say, "Ah,
Um,
there's the 8.5 by 11 over in the corner."
yeah, this is when testing really becomes important.
So, as far as at least the specifics on the papers, I know both of you have used various different techniques and methods in traditional comic media for each of your comics. When making your comics, what kind of paper did you use, and what kind of paper do you think would work for comics?
Personally, my first webcomic, Geralt, I did entirely in like hardbound sketchbooks, which were specifically I was looking mostly for size at the beginning. I wanted all my sketchbooks to match when I put them together on a shelf. So the most important thing to me was that they were all black and had hardbound black leather covers. Um, and I didn't really start meticulously testing the paper on the inside until I'd already been at it for a few years. So some of my sketchbooks had very different paper textures. Sometimes they would be almost like just sheets of printer paper in there, like very bright white, very flat texture. Sometimes they'd have a little bit more tooth. Sometimes I hit on a random dud, and I wish I knew what was up with that one. Um, but gradually, I started to kind of refine it into something that I liked that would accept the markers. And it wasn't perfect for the medium I was using. The inks that I used tended to bleed through the paper, so I'd have to put a protection sheet down to stop it from getting on whatever was underneath. Um, but I quite like working with them. If you stick with established brands for those types of sketchbooks, you can control and pretty much expect what you're going to get out of them. For my second comic, I moved to digital, but I've been doing short stories traditionally, and for those, I've switched to using Bristol paper, which is really good for doing comics on. It's heavier paper and it has a really nice, like, smooth surface. It doesn't, it's not too absorbent for ink, but it doesn't like make it sit on top of it completely. Like, there's some paper where if you lay down an ink line, it will never fully dry into the paper, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have to be worried about smudging it later on. If you touch it,
Mm.
even after it's dry, it'll get everywhere, and that sucks. But most Bristol tends not to do that, so I've been using Strathmore and Canson Bristol paper for my shorts, and I quite like it. I think with when it comes to comics, like the most popular mediums are definitely like pencil, like ink from pens or from brushes, markers, and sometimes watercolor. And Bristol is a really solid mixed media paper for all of those mediums.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, Bristol's great for that.
Yeah, they usually like you'll see. I do believe it's Canson that specifically does have a line, and other um, companies have a line specifically actually for comics that include gutters. And I actually own a couple of. There's a strip size, and then there's a more traditional kind of comic book style size that includes the blue gutters, so that it's kind of prepared for the bleed that you'll expect with that. And they're mainly done on the Bristol because, as Thane was saying, like you have that smooth side on top, which is usually preferred when you do have the inks and the pencils and stuff like that. You don't have a lot of like that opposition when using these mediums where your pen or pencil catches in the paper and you accidentally tear or anything like that. It's pretty versatile and it's pretty sturdy, as well as having a second side underneath, usually having a little bit more of that grit if you did want to have um, that kind of texture in your works. Specifically for the comic that I do, Ghost Junk Sickness, we actually use a mixed media that is also a Canson brand. Um, we work on 11 by 14, so pretty large so that we can kind of get the brushstrokes that we want. But the main thing about choosing something like this is that the weight of the paper is it's pretty good, and it's got really good retention for the inks that we use. So one thing that you want to consider when doing things traditionally as far as paper is concerned is when you look at the weight of the paper, kind of helps you decide how it's going to retain the medium that you choose. So us using inks, we're going to be filling in a lot of like large areas with just total black inks. And sometimes you'll notice on less weighted paper, you'll notice the buckling, and that's going to be really, really hard to scan and to upload digitally. So, keeping in mind with something that can hold on to things a little bit easier, prevent that buckling from happening.
Yeah, you mentioned that paper that's purpose built for with the blue gutters already on there, and I actually used that myself for a number of years for pencil work because traditional inks used to terrify me a lot more than they do now. So I did a lot of my traditional pencils were done on that paper, and then I would scan everything in and do that, and it was very forgiving for me as a beginner artist as well. And it was very easy for me to just go into the store. And I'm like, okay, I have no clue what any of this means. Just give me the comic paper, and it says comic on the top. So like as far as going into some place, if you're overwhelmed by the paper, like you really can't go wrong with that. um you're kind of locked into it a bit though, and like it only comes with like most other Bristol packs, it comes with like 10 or 20 um actual pieces of paper. So it's like using Bristol in that sense, and it's a little on the pricier side because you're paying for the extra features of the blue line. um if you want to go a little cheaper, Deleter sells the correct paper size and texture without the blue lines on it. So that saves you a little bit of money and you get a little bit more value for that. But that's a great place for a starter. And I know a lot of different people either use that or will even heck use newsprint or other things to make their work on. And it's really just messing around with it and figuring out what works for you and just trying a bunch of different things. um
I will come in and say, don't use newsprint for your comics.
Don't, yeah.
so why wouldn't
So
you?
newsprint is always going to have that acidity into it. It's one of the papers that are kind of mainly always having the acid in it and the non-archival purposes. It's something that is basically meant for you to practice on. Like newspaper itself, it's not something that's supposed to be forever. And the paper is very, very flimsy. It acts more like tracing paper. It tears very easy. The mediums that it interacts with isn't very substantial. It's easy to smudge. You can't get a lot done with it. So I would definitely, aside from practicing, like definitely use it for practicing because, you know, it's something that's non-committal, I guess I will say. But it's not good for archiving if you're hoping to keep your comic for more than a
Yeah,
year, I should say.
newsprint and printer paper are both kind of in a similar category for me, where you can definitely have a lot of fun playing around on a medium knowing that it's so impermanent. Like if you have a hard time getting ideas out and you have that problem with like, oh no, I'm looking at a
Mm.
blank page, where do I start? I don't want to mess it up. Sometimes it's kind of freeing to know that you're looking at a material that is like
Mhm.
as cheap as dirt, and you can like mess it up and it's fine. It's not a big fancy sketchbook or like, a sheet of expensive watercolor paper you paid $10 for.
Mhm.
So sometimes it can be easier to let like ideas flow with mediums like that. So it's great to kind of have them on hand. Just be aware that however far you get with it, eventually, if you want to turn it into something finished, you're going to have to transfer it onto another medium that is a little more has a little bit more of a shelf life to it.
Mhm.
It's a little more
Yeah.
permanent.
If you've ever seen like an old newspaper, any
Oh
newspaper
yeah,
that's older than like 3 or 4 years, like it's yellow, the
it's like
corners are coming
yellow. Yeah.
apart. I actually, so story time, when the Concorde crash happened, I was a little kid and we got a copy of the newspaper in for that day, and it had a huge 2-page spread in the middle of it about the crash of the Concorde airplane, and I was fascinated with the story. And I actually took that newspaper spread and I kept it. And I put it like in a big drawer, laid it out all flat. Like I was super careful with it, kept it out of the sunlight and everything. And it's still now it's orange. And if you touch it, it just turns into dust under your fingertip. Like
Oh
so I
no.
mean, and that was like a printed newspaper. If this had been art that I had poured my soul into, I'd probably feel some kind of way about it today. So just keep in mind when you're picking your materials, like if you're going to be sad to have this be gone or irreparably like yellow and look funny, like maybe think before you commit to using a material like that.
Yeah. But that does bring us into our next question, though, which is when you're looking at all the sketchbooks that you can buy to either practice or actually draw your comic in if you're going traditional. What are some of the things that you look at as far as options for that?
Well, the really, really cool thing about sketchbooks is that, and actually art in general, I'm going to definitely say that, is that there's a lot of accessible options out there and a lot of varying different types that you can get. Like, you can get a sketchbook of oil paper, which is wild, but it happens. It's out there, it exists. And so you have like this large range of whatever medium is your best friend to kind of work with these sketchbooks. And again, always keeping in mind, what is your favorite kind of medium? What are you going to be doing, working in, and kind of, going from there. Your typical sketchbook is going to have sketch paper, hence the word sketch, which is paper that has a little bit more weight to it. Definitely, it's not like newsprint. It is a level, definitely, actually several levels above that. Still has a finish on it, and it still is technically more archival and more, like I said, weighted. So you can use inks, you can use pens, you can use pencils, charcoal, pastels, and nowadays they have all these nice little like notes of what you can do with them. So definitely pay attention to that. They'll usually have like a little layout of what mediums work best with that. But yeah, that's just something that you want to pay attention to is the medium before you go in because there are a lot of options as far as paper quality goes for sketchbooks.
Aside from the paper that's inside the sketchbook, I personally just tend to go for what do I think I could enjoy drawing in? What feels good in my hands? If I pick it up, do I
Mhm.
like it? I gravitate towards perfect bound sketchbooks, which means that the page block is glued together on one side and it has a spine like a hardcover book. But I know people who love coil bound sketchbooks where the pages just have like holes punched all down one side and there's a big wire coil that holds them together, and I have never quite gotten it. They always feel kind of flimsy. And if I do pencil work in those, it's very frustrating because the pages rub together very slightly every time you put the book away. And if you do a big fancy shaded pencil illustration on page one of your coil bound sketchbook and you put it in a backpack and you take it out the next day and then you keep putting it away and taking it out for another year, by the time you're at the end of that sketchbook, that first picture in
Oh my
pencil is going
god,
to be just
yeah.
a smudged mess unless you spray it with fixative. Yeah. So that turned me off of coil bound sketchbooks. I mean, not that I'm talking from experience or anything, but I mean, I just haven't cared for them since. Uh, but I have friends who love them because with a coil bound sketchbook, you can take the page block and like turn it all the way backwards, and then you have like it'll always have the same feel in your hands. Whereas a perfect bound sketchbook, when you're starting it, you have a nice solid block of pages under you, and then this big floppy cover just hanging out to the side. And then when you're in the middle, you tend to have a little bit of a bow to the pages where they meet the spine, like they'll bend and it won't lie perfectly flat. And then once you hit the end, it's very difficult to scan the
Mhm.
last pages in a perfect bound sketchbook because you have to hold down this like 2 pages on the scanner bed and then 200 pages are hanging off to the side trying to pull it right off again. Um, so despite those things, I still like perfect bound. But if you're looking for a sketchbook of your own, it's good to just pick things up and give each a try
Mhm.
and see what you like better.
That's like,
And also
oh.
size. Like if you like drawing big, get a big sketchbook. If you like drawing tiny,
Mhm.
get a tiny sketchbook.
Yeah, do the perfect bound ones that you use have like those perforated edges on all the pages at all, or
Not usually. That's much more common in coil bound. I'm sure
yeah.
somewhere out there is a perfect bound sketchbook with the perforations, but I haven't bought any, so not usually.
Yeah. I like the customizability. Is that a word? Customizability?
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
That's a yeah. Anyway, I like the customizability of perfect bounds. I am also a perfect bound simp. My favorite thing to do, oh my goodness. My favorite thing to do when I get my perfect bound sketchbook, A, is to hoard them, and B, when I'm moving next to the sketchbook that I'm going to be using, I love to like gesso the front and then paint the front, and then I'm getting all excited about what's going to be the first thing that I put into my sketchbook. That first page is always like so monumental. It goes down from there, but like the love that goes into when you get a new sketchbook and you're like, this is it. Like this is gonna be the sketchbook. Like watch out,
You
world.
gotta break it in. My trick is stickers.
Yes.
I have an enormous collection of stickers, and whenever I open a new sketchbook for the first time and it's all shiny, and I've pulled it open to the first page, and I'm like, "This is it, no going back." The first thing that I do is I just open my sticker collection and I put a whole bunch of stickers on it, and now suddenly the sketchbook has been broken into. I don't
Yes.
have to worry about the pressure anymore. It's already ruined.
It's oh my god.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
I love breaking ground in new sketchbooks.
I
It's so
honestly, I
fun.
just also just love the sticker galleries because now each of my sketchbook has this fantastic little collection of cool stickers in the first pages, and it's actually a
And
lot
it
of fun
acts
to
as
look
like a
at them.
little time
Oh,
capsule.
it
Yeah,
does.
it's like, oh, this is when I went to that convention and I met that artist, or
Oh,
like
I
this is when
love
I went
that.
and toured around
So
that little
cute.
town and got a commemorative sticker.
I love that so much. I like that, like, you also scan the front of your sketchbooks with the stickers to use that as like a cover image if you ever release your sketches on a PDF. Like,
Yeah.
I love that so much. That's such a good idea.
I actually only started doing that very recently with that one sketchbook because the cover was so, I had put so many stickers on it, and it's kind of a funny reason. I used, when I got those black perfect bound hardcover sketchbooks, they all literally look identical on the shelf.
Hmm.
So I had to find some way to differentiate them. So I'd always put one cool vinyl sticker on the front cover. So I'd be like, oh, this is the one with the crazy whale sticker. That's the one I'm in right now. The last one was the one with the dragon, and the one before that was the car. Um, and because the rest of the cover was totally blank with no other features on it, that was all I would do. It's like this one sticker feature showcase. And then when you open it, you'd see the rest of the gallery. Um, but after I finished Geralt, suddenly I was free to use different sketchbooks for the first time. And I figured this is a time to start experimenting. And I finally started using all the various, very fancy sketchbooks that people had gifted me over the years
Oh,
that I never touched because I was afraid to. And I was working on Geralt, so I was like, well, I'll just wait. I'll put this away for later. And I finally drew my way through all of them. I had run out of available sketchbooks to draw in, and I went to an art store to buy a new sketchbook for the first time, and I just completely blanked on what to buy. So I bought this little coil bound thing called bee paper, which the paper in it was really nice, but it had one of those, like, you know, the yellow covers that's all printed on, and it had like a funny little mascot and
oh
stuff. And I was
yes.
like, I don't want to look at this every time I open my sketchbook. And for a while, I was thinking I would cover it with paper or paint on it with acrylic or do something cool like that. But then in the end, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use like 100 stickers and wallpaper it with
I
stickers.
love that idea.
That's fantastic.
Are we gonna be talking about like our favorite papers? Can we talk about our favorite papers?
Yeah, yeah. What's your
Oh
favorite
my
paper?
god. Oh my god. It always depends on the medium. I've said that a lot in this episode. Always depends on the medium. But y'all, it always depends on the medium. Um First things first, when you're looking for paper, get your hands ready. Get your hands dirty. It's feeling time. Feel that paper. Like you will know when is your favorite paper, what is your favorite paper. It's gonna hit you the moment your hand touches that paper, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, here it is. This is it. This is you're gonna be drawn on." And do that for sketchbooks too. Like previously talking about that. Oh my god, open those sketchbooks. Feel the paper. It always changes depending on the brand, depending on the medium, depending on the type. Feel the paper. Now I have to talk about my favorite paper.
Sometimes the store will let you open the plastic wrap on a sketchbook if you ask them. I hate it when they put the sketchbooks in plastic wrap, but sometimes they will let you open the sketchbooks anyway and feel the paper inside. It's very important, so I recommend asking.
Yes, it's very important. Like, oh my god,
You got to understand the texture of what you're getting.
yes.
I always found that weird too that they were plastic wrapped because it's like, how can you tell what you're gonna be drawing on?
Don't deny me
Like
touching.
I know it's for protection, but no, let me touch the paper. Uh, and it's just like said before, it's just, you know, if you don't know what you're gonna want to draw on. I know there's some places that offer like little sampler
Yes.
packs. Like I think Jet Pens used to offer one. I don't know if they still do. Um, but you can just get like the tiniest version of the paper that you can or whatever, and just mess around with it. Like if you get the cheap sketchbook version of whatever paper you think you want to draw, and you find out, wow, I really like this, then go and buy like the 11 by 17 version of the sketchbook or
Yeah.
whatever,
I'm pretty
rather than
sure it should
starting
be
on
a
like the
thing,
9 by 14
like to
version.
grab the paper sampler packs. That's a great idea. Like, just do it. Like, I am 100% a person who loves to hoard paper, especially like over the years and years and years and years of doing art. I don't even know what kind of paper I have anymore. It's all the touching game. That's the only way I can be like, okay, this is right for me now. None of it's labeled at this point with the amount that I have, but get those phalanges out.
When it comes to looking for paper at an art store, unfortunately, it's trickier right now during
Yeah.
our year 2021 to go physically into a
Yeah.
store and feel everything in it. But one thing that I
It's
always
kind of frowned upon.
yeah, one thing that I like that some art stores do is that they'll have sometimes they'll take a little strip of paper and they'll allow you to like test pens and stuff on it,
Yes.
which is kind of handy. Um, you can draw little anime eyes on their little test strips and see what it's like. It's just kind of fun.
It's always anime eyes.
Thane,
Got to be an anime eye. Yes.
what's your favorite paper?
Well, I'm probably going to say Bristol just because of how much I keep going back to it. When it comes to slightly nicer paper, uh, most of the time I'm just buying a sketchbook because I kind of like the cover and I think I can tolerate the paper that's inside of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if I want to do something that's like a little nicer, I always tend to get Bristol, usually from Strathmore Canson, with or without the little blue comic lines. But I'll do illustrations on it as well as like comic pages, and I just like the way it handles everything I've put on it, honestly.
Yeah. It's
It
really good
even
for
it's
markers.
not a watercolor paper, but it can handle small
Yes.
amounts of watercolors if you keep the if you're not doing the entire page at once, the
Mhm.
wrinkling it doesn't even get too bad because it's actually a 2-ply paper. It's 2 sheets that are put together, sometimes 3-ply to make it extra sturdy. Got good heft,
Oh, it
good
does.
texture.
And you can get it like
So
recycled
it's just
too, and it comes like
Mm-hmm.
just as good quality recycled. It's cheaper. Bristol's good. I love it on inks. It's so
it's
smooth.
so
It
versatile too.
is. It so is. I've definitely done acrylic paintings on Bristol.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
It's very funny because my first association with Bristol was like elementary school. When you do science projects, they would always have us buy like big sheets of like neon green or
Yes.
orange Bristol paper, and you'd like print out your little science project stuff and glue it on there, and then that would be your presentation. And I didn't realize that like Bristol was a legit type of paper for making art on until years
And
later.
not just science fair material.
Yeah.
Gotta fold it
It's
three
like, whoa, you
ways.
can use that for that?
Yeah.
Wow, I can't believe people are making comics on trifold posted paper.
That is far from the biggest mind-blowing thing that I've ever learned about paper, though. There's some crazy stuff
Oh,
people can do with paper.
like Yupo?
Uh, okay, we can touch on Yupo, but I was specifically thinking of like making clothes out of it. Because there are types of
Yes.
paper that are so supple and strong that you can create like outfits, not necessarily athletic wear, but they look legit.
That's
Yeah, it's like the
crazy.
way that you like kind of wear the paper. Wear, not wear. Um but there's like this method of like not folding it a bunch of times, but trying to wear it down in a shape and it feels like cloth. It's cool. It's so cool.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. There's a paper store here. Most of the store, like when I've been saying earlier in this episode, like when you go to the store, usually I mean art stores like up here in Canada where I live, it'll be Curry's or Desserts is where I buy most of my art supplies. But there's also a store here in Toronto called the Paper Place, which specializes exclusively in pens. No, I mean paper.
Still sounds like heaven.
They have an enormous collection of beautiful like paper from all around the world. They have Japanese Chiogami papers and like Tibetan papers and beautiful patterned like woodblock printed
Oh my
paper. They
god.
have all these different kinds of paper stocks that people can use. It's popular for people who are getting like wedding invitations and stuff printed. They'll
Mm.
buy like a large quantity of card sized paper stock and they can pick like, ooh, I like this like silver with a hint of glitter to it, and
Oh,
you can get it in all different sizes. It's so fun just to walk in there and like look at everything.
that sounds like
um
heaven.
yeah, and there's some that's like so thin like lace. I have a friend who makes paper craft art, where she cuts like pieces of paper into different forms and glues them together to make illustrations, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
That's incredible. God, I love paper. Um, I didn't even say what my favorite paper was.
Yeah, what's your
No.
I
favorite
mean,
paper?
I also am a huge Bristol stan. I love Bristol. It's great for inks and like markers, and it holds things. It has good retention. Again, I've used it for acrylics. 10 out of 10 would recommend. But my favorite paper is I really, really like working in watercolors. And I have been absolutely in love with Arches papers for watercolors. That's a sturdy heckin' paper. Like, oh my goodness, the detail that you can get on this stuff and the vibrancy of the colors that come through depending on how you prep it. It's incredible. It's super versatile, super heavy. It's got that beautiful, you can get it in like giant sheets so that it has that like really raw toothed edge that absolutely like I'm in love with, and it tears beautifully. Dreamy sigh. God.
It's extremely nice to hold and to work with. I don't do a lot of watercolor, but when I do, I'm like, I want to use this stuff.
Oh my god, yeah.
Almost just an excuse to have that paper in the house. I got to do watercolor if I'm going to use this stuff, right?
Right.
Oh my god. It is definitely on the pricier side. I feel like it's one of the highest end of watercolors that you can get from like a normal like art store like Curry's Day
Mm.
Sayers. Um but oh my goodness, the quality of it is definitely like, I mean, it's there. It's definitely there. It's
Well,
worth it.
Arches has really become synonymous with watercolor paper. If you're asking anybody for like to tell you, just name some watercolor paper brands, Arches is probably going to be at the top of the list.
Hmm.
They've been around since
Yeah.
1492, so there's a long time to establish that brand.
Oh god.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think one of the interesting things though that you brought up there is just with it being on the pricier side is would you recommend using Arches for a comic?
No. No, I wouldn't. I 100% would not. I would recommend using
No.
Arches if you did some kind of illustrative project, did like some kind of illustrative book that didn't have like, every page of an illustration. But sequential art, I don't think so. One thing that is difficult with Arches is that there's a lot of planning in the process to use this paper. So what I'm talking about is normally, um, well, not normally, but it is the norm in a lot of people's practices with art is that you have like different layers and steps that you go to when you do your comic. So you have your either blue lines, your pencil lines, your inks, you erase that, you go to colors. But one thing that Arches isn't the best for is workarounds. And if you're someone who doesn't have the most confident lines, or is someone who's prone to like using an eraser a lot, because of the nature of the paper, it will start to kind of lift and separate in some areas and kind of smudge the more finer details because it's meant for more of a wet media. So when you're kind of like applying that friction with pencils, that's something that's a little bit more trickier unless like your entire style is clean enough and done in these steps that you can just completely apply it to Arches and you also have a lot of money. I
Yeah.
wouldn't suggest using it for that. But as far as illustrations go, something that you want to make a really big like tribute to or big impact with, I would suggest Arches for that, just not long-term sequential.
Yeah, one of the things with most watercolor paper, especially the ones that are cold press, which means they have a much more intense textured feeling to them. The other option is hot press, which tends to feel smoother. But any paper with a distinct texture when you run your hands along it, that is not going to take an eraser very well because you'll basically shave down the paper texture
Yeah.
and crush it as you're doing that. And if you use an eraser on watercolor paper and then you put paint on it afterwards, it'll completely change the way the paint is handled just in that spot where you use the eraser. So when you're doing a watercolor piece, it's best to plan it somewhere else and transfer your pencils to it after the fact, just so that you're not working directly on that surface for the drafting part. The It's not always a bad idea because there are smooth watercolor papers that can handle that sort of thing a bit better. But the other reason why I wouldn't recommend people do their comics entirely on that, unless it's a very short comic, is that these papers also tend to be very thick
Mm-hmm.
and chunky. And if you do a 100-page comic, you're going to have to expect to store that in an enormous cardboard box because those pages are going to be so thick they won't fit
Mm-hmm.
in any other storage system very easily.
No.
Always think long term when you're doing comics. Absolutely. Comics is lots of pages. Think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Again, like,
as Thane had the experience with Chiralt, where with okay, you've got this one paper, get ready to use this for the next 1,000
mm-hmm.
pages.
How many sketchbooks
Mm-hmm.
did you fill?
I think about 21.
Oh my gosh.
I should note, I wasn't using them exclusively for the comic. So like if folks flip through those sketchbooks, it would be like Charlotte page, Charlotte page, Charlotte page, random doodling, ink illustration, Charlotte, fan art of some other comic, Charlotte, that sort of thing. Just it's a big old mix. And because the pages were done in marker, I could only draw on one side of each page.
Mm-hmm.
So that also would kind of cut down the amount of pages that I could draw in each sketchbook, but it was still a 1,267 page comic, and that's going to take up a lot of space when you have that many sheets of paper kicking around.
Yeah. We store all of the ghost junk that we do. So the paper that we use for ghost junk sickness has a perforated edge, so we can take everything out of the coil bound. But we also use them to help store, and we have this giant file cabinet that just like juts out and has almost 1,000 pages there too. And it's really intimidating to see them all there, taking up space. I couldn't
Yeah,
imagine the
Cool,
amount
but
of space.
intimidating.
21 books. Oh my god.
I have all my Chiralt sketchbooks in one of those big banker boxes thing,
Oh my
like the cardboard, like with the handles and everything.
god.
And I keep thinking that maybe I should start like cutting out the pages themselves and storing those in one spot and the other art somewhere else. But because I'm so attached to the shape of the sketchbooks themselves, like, oh, it's got all the stickers and like, oh, that's when I was hanging out with that friend and we drew this together, stuff like that. It's one of the downsides of perfect bound sketchbooks, I guess. It feels much more of a process to extract the art from the book that it was drawn in after the fact.
Oh gosh, yeah. I have this like random Crayola blade that I got from gosh nowhere. Like, you're an artist and you randomly hoard things and you're like, I have this. I don't know where it came from, but it's mine now. So it's this one, it's like a wand and it has a circle part, and that's to prevent children from stabbing themselves. And then it's got the blade inside, and I use that specifically to take out sketchbook paper, because the guard helps everything be the same size, basically working as some kind of bleed or gutter or something like that. But that works. It only cuts like one paper deep because it's for babies. So, I mean, works for me.
That sounds like a good idea. If I had been really smart when I was working on Chiralt, I would probably have done that because there are definitely some early pages in the comic which I scanned not very well. I'm not sure whether these were pages from the middle of the sketchbook or like from the end, but I wasn't pressing down quite hard enough on the pages. And so there's like a little strip on the left hand side of the
Oh,
page where the art
yeah.
gets a little bit blurry.
Yeah.
And if I
Nah.
had cut the pages out so that they could lay flat on the scanner bed, I wouldn't have had that problem. But I guess that is something to think about for folks who are looking to buy a sketchbook, is that the 8 by 11 size will fit almost perfectly on a scanner bed, but anything, or on a standard scanner bed. But anything bigger than that, you either need a special scanner or you have to scan it twice and then
Mm-hmm.
stitch it together after the fact in Photoshop or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that depending on how much you enjoy that process, it might influence your choice of
That is what we do for Ghost Junk. It's scanned in 2 parts.
Oh,
And I will
could-
definitely
Oh,
admit that
can't
you
stand
could
it.
definitely see the seam. It's never
Ah.
perfect. So sometimes you will see that small seam being like, aha, it's there. I see you.
yeah, and I know when I used to do my pencils traditionally, it was on that comic paper that's like never gonna fit in a standard scanner. So I actually would drag it to Staples and pay the $2.50 or whatever it took for me to photocopy each and every single page. And they had the scanner that connected up to like Google Drive or whatever, and then it's like, okay, this better look good when I get home. You're playing with fate there. So it's and like those large format scanners are starting to get very rare and hard to find. So it's definitely something to consider when you're planning things out the long term, is what are you willing to put up with for 5 to 10 years?
Oh, I can put up with all paper for 5 to 10 years. I just love feeling paper. Like, I'm looking at this paper that I have, and it's got some raw edges, and I'm like, I gotta plan a painting now. I just need to be in contact with this paper.
Oh, a little terminology thing when they do that kind of torn away edges on watercolor paper and stuff, where it's like they didn't cut it with a knife or something, they like ripped it. They call that a deckled edge.
Oh,
Ooh.
God. Propose to me with those terms.
Factoid. Factoid to close things out.
Well, I actually got to make one at one point because when I was doing printmaking at school, they had us work on these enormous sheets of paper, and we would print a couple of prints to each giant sheet, and then we would tear them apart instead of cutting them apart. And the way you generate those deckled edges is you have like a special ruler,
Yes.
and the ruler is not straight on the side that you're using to kind of tear the paper on. Like it's this really thick metal thing with like this crazy like chunky kind of textured thing. So you lay it on the paper and then you just tear very slowly away from one end, and it creates this really beautiful kind of look.
We should go paint. Let's go paint.
On my way.
God.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's go paint.
Well, I guess since we have to go and leave to go paint, I think that wraps it up for today. Thank you all so much for listening. I've been Rennie, and you can check out my work at capeblast.com.
I'm Crispy, and you can check out my work at ghostjunksickness.com.
And I am Verathane, and you can check out my work at witchwoodcomic.com. It's with a Y.
Oh my God. Can you imagine like the good paints though? The watercolored edges, the decals.
Thank you so much for listening to Screen Tones. Please subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to also follow us on Twitter at ScreenTonesCast.